Hi, I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. Lots of things going on in the region, and joining us to talk about some of the dynamics in Idaho education, specifically at universities, is Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News. Thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
Oh, thanks for having me, Scott.
So, Kevin, there of course have been cases of COVID-19 going up on college campuses around the country and in Idaho, and some of the colleges and universities there are particularly interesting. I'm thinking of the University of Idaho in Moscow. Just across the border is Pullman and Washington State University. They've had a big case jump, but Moscow, Idaho, a little different, not quite so bad. What are some of the dynamics there in Moscow?
Well, as you say, they've definitely had a case increase on the campus, and it's been increasing for the past couple of weeks. And what university officials think is going on here is a series of outbreaks that are tied to the Greek community, to the fraternity houses and the sorority houses that are right on the fringe of campus. They don't think that they're seeing spread through classroom activities, but nonetheless, the university has told professors that if they want to go with virtual learning for the time being, they can do that. They're trying to ramp up testing of all students, not just students who live in the fraternities and the sororities, to try to get a handle on the caseload. U of I is not the only university in the state that's dealing with a big uptick in cases and a big uptick in cases in their communities. I mean, clear across the state, BYU Idaho and Rexburg, very different university environment, very different community. I mean, this is Rexburg, Eastern Idaho, very conservative, heavily Mormon community. BYU Idaho, owned by the Mormon Church. Madison County, the home to BYU Idaho, has seen a huge uptick in cases. They are probably the hot zone of all hot zones in the state. And BYU Idaho has talked about the possibility of having to go online, of having to go off of face-to-face learning for at least a short period of time. U of I has not yet gone that route. The most recent word from the U of I is they want to continue face-to-face learning, at least for the time being, while they try to get a handle on what's going on with cases. You know, I think overarching, Scott, I think what's happening at U of I and what's happening with most of the state universities right now is officials, they just want to get to Thanksgiving, because the plan is to go virtual after Thanksgiving break, to round out and close out the fall semester with a virtual learning option. Well, not a virtual learning option, to just go virtual, and students would not return to the campuses after Thanksgiving. So you almost had this sense that the administrators are just checking off days on the calendar, hoping to get one day closer to Thanksgiving break so that they can get through the fall semester without having to go online. But it is it's a day-to-day, week-to-week process, and we're following the case numbers across the system pretty closely.
Right. And aren't we all just waiting to get to Thanksgiving or to the end of the year or whatever we are looking forward to at some point, end of the election
and it has,
whatever it is, yeah.
Definitely, and it has lasting implications for the colleges and universities, because I don't think anybody really knows what to expect for spring semester. What will spring semester look like? How many students will come back for spring semester, or will some of them just kind of say, this is too uncertain, there's too much flux, I had to go online in the middle of the semester when I didn't want to, I'm just going to take the semester off, I'm not going to come back. So nobody really knows what to expect in the spring. They don't know what it's going to look like, they don't know what enrollment's going to look like, and if the colleges and universities can at least get through the fall, it might help keep students in the system and keep them coming back and have them, come back for the spring.
And so we should have said at the top that, Idaho schools and colleges are largely in person or have this hybrid model compared to schools in Washington State University right there in Pullman is doing all online. University of Washington, same thing. Other universities in Washington are as well, but not all of them. Some are doing a hybrid model as well, like we've seen in Idaho schools. But I'm curious though, what were some of those dynamics? Why have the Idaho colleges and universities largely decided to have this hybrid or in-person model, whereas other schools and states have not?
Well, I think when everybody had to close down so abruptly in the spring, the colleges and universities really wanted to try to figure out how to get back to some kind of normalcy, some sort of component of face-to-face learning. And, the administrators will say, and, the instructors will say, this is what students want. This is what they expected when they signed on in the first place. And online learning works for some students, doesn't work for other students. It's an interesting thing. Boise State, the largest university in the state, they actually expect that their overall enrollment might actually increase a little bit this fall. And that's unusual. Most colleges and universities are bracing for enrollment decreases, including U of I. Boise State is expecting a little bit of an increase, and where they think they're getting the increase is from out of state. Students from states, like California or Washington State, saying, I want a face-to-face experience, and if I can't get that in my home state, well, we'll just, we'll pay the out-of-state tuition, we'll go to Idaho, we'll go to Boise State, and we'll learn face-to-face there. So I think there's an educational motivation here that's driving the universities and the colleges saying, this is what we want to provide. This is the best possible way to teach students. But I think there's also there's some market share that colleges and universities in the state are hoping to tap into.
Right. And on that note, of course, budgets are always a concern for all sorts of educational institutions. Every sort of organization needs to be concerned about their budget. And on that note, colleges and universities in Idaho were already strapped, in the public ones at least, were already strapped facing, big budget implications and cuts coming into this year before the pandemic. And then, of course, everything else happened. But remind us of what some of those concerns were, maybe particularly with the University of Idaho at the beginning of 2020.
I think what happened at the University of Idaho is very universal to a lot of institutions. When the pandemic hit in March and the U of I had to send all of the students home for spring semester, that left a big hole in the university's budget in terms of lost revenue. Reimbursing students for room and board, reimbursing them for other expenses other losses that they incurred when they had to go home, just canceling events, canceling, on-campus events, closing the bookstore, having, no bookstore revenue or limited parking revenue, all of those things. It all adds up. It's all part of the revenue picture for the U of I, for other institutions across the state and across the country. I want to say that U of I pegged its spring losses at about $7 million. And that's on the heels of some serious cash flow issues that the University of Idaho has had to work through over the past couple of years through furloughs, through other reductions. They had just about come up with a plan to get through that financial crisis, and then coronavirus hits.
Right. And so that sets up this question as it relates to some of the infusion of money that Idaho Education, K-12 and higher education has received vis-a-vis the coronavirus safety rescue packages from the federal government, the CARES Act. So Governor Brad Little recently announced a big infusion of cash to Idaho Education, including for universities. Remind us how much was that? And I'm kind of curious, I hope it doesn't sound cynical, is that actually a good thing as it relates to these college budgets, particularly the University of Idaho, that we're dealing with, like you said, this cash crunch before the pandemic? And so is this basically almost like a good thing, I hate to phrase it like that, like a vitamin shot in the arm that they desperately needed regardless of the pandemic?
I wouldn't put it that way, and I don't think university officials would either, but I think what they would say is that this was desperately needed to cover some of the losses, to cover some of those lost revenues, to cover some of the added expenses of going online in the spring and preparing to go face-to-face in the fall. All of these expenses, whether it's student testing, student screening, whether it's thermal scanners or plexiglass, or preparing classrooms so that they're Zoom capable. All of those expenses, that's what the CARES Act helped cover. Lost revenues and added expenses, but it really doesn't cover any of the other financial problems that U of I was facing, or Idaho State University was facing, or that Boise State University is facing right now. They're coming into a financial crunch down here where they've begun furloughing staff, and they'll probably have to continue to furlough staff because a lot of the lost revenue, you're not going to get it all back. And CARES Act, it's a little bit north of $50 million that the public universities received, and while it's helped, it hasn't completely covered all of their financial challenges, and it wasn't designed to.
We've talked before, Kevin, about online learning in Idaho as it relates more to K through 12. And I wonder if you've been aware of any more research in terms of how students might be left behind, the rural versus urban gap in terms of just a lot of educational achievements has long been documented, and you've helped cover some of that. But I'm curious if you're aware of any more research or just people who have been tracking these sorts of educational outcomes in terms of K through 12 or even at the university level for people who are now suddenly learning online.
I think right now there are two ways of looking at it. It's the educational outcomes that we're still going to be measuring this year and beyond, and just the technological challenges. So we're not going to get a really clear sense of the educational outcomes right away. I'll be curious to see what the fall reading scores are for young kids, for kindergarten through third graders, and try to get a sense of how are kids learning to read? How are they learning reading skills for a lot of students in an online setting? But we're also seeing this continued problem of access to technology, access to reliable technology. Speaking of CARES Act money, the state is putting another $50 million into a grant program that's going to launch later this month to provide families money to offset the cost of a computer or a laptop or internet connection. All of these things that all of a sudden the state is realizing, we don't have, the universal technological access that we need to make the move to online learning in the K-12 environment. In rural districts, but even in urban districts, there are families that are really struggling with just getting their kids plugged in and getting them in a place where they can learn.
Well, it's all good information. We thank you for coming on to share it with us today, Kevin.
Thank you. Anytime.
Kevin Richert is with Idaho Education News. You can see more of his reporting on these and other topics at idahoednews.org. And for more Northwest news, come to our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.